Hey, my name is Henry, and her fence job ended with a marriage proposal. I'm 56, retired, a widower, living alone in a house my own hands built, and I had made my peace with quiet years. Then a woman named Amelia called about a broken back fence, and by the end of that first afternoon, she asked me to marry her for 1 year, not for love, but because a clause in her grandfather's will was about to cost her the family company. She needed a steady man no one would question, and she chose me because I was older, local, and clearly not after her money. I said yes because she asked like someone who had run out of road, and I had no idea what I was really agreeing to. I should tell you what my life looked like before the phone rang. Without that, you won't understand why I said yes to a stranger. I'm a carpenter by trade, retired now going on 2 years, and I live in the same small house I built the year I married my wife, Mary. She's been gone 4 years this fall. Cancer. Fast. The kind that doesn't give you time to practice being without someone. People in town still ask how I'm doing, and I always say fine. The truth is too quiet a thing to hand somebody over a grocery counter. The house sits on a half-acre at the edge of town, oak out front, a porch I built wide enough for 2 chairs even though I only use the one. Mornings I drink my coffee out there and watch the light come up over the field across the road. The light is the one thing that still feels like a gift. Afternoons, I putter. I fix a neighbor's screen, replace a rotted step, tune up somebody's old door that won't latch. I don't charge much, and I don't need to. The pension covers the bills, and my hands still know what they're doing even when the rest of me moves slower than it used to. There's a diner in town that smells like burnt coffee all morning, and I go there most days around 11. The same 6 men sit at the long table, and they've been sitting there since I was young. They ask me to join, and sometimes I do, and we talk about weather and prices and whose roof is leaking now. It's good talk, the kind that asks nothing of you. But it ends, and I drive home to a house that's been waiting for me to come back and be quiet in it. I wasn't lonely the way people tell you about loneliness. I didn't sit up at night aching, but the phone didn't ring much after dark anymore, and the evenings had gotten long in a way they never were when Mary was alive. I'd heat up something simple, read a little, fall asleep in the chair with the lamp on. I told myself I'd made peace with it, and I think I half believed it. The other half knew I was just getting through the days in order. So when a woman I'd never met called about replacing a back fence before the week was out, I said sure the way I say sure to most things, easy and without thinking. She gave me an address on the hill, the old Calloway place, a house I'd driven past 100 times and never once seen anybody on the porch. She sounded tired on the phone, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep, and she said she'd pay fare. I told her I'd come Tuesday afternoon, hung up, and didn't think much of it. I had no idea I was driving up that hill toward the question that would undo my quiet life. The house up the hill was bigger than I expected, white 2-story, with a wide covered porch and land that rolled back into a stand of old maples. Too big for one person, I thought, too kept up for a place I'd never seen a soul at. I parked behind a dark sedan and grabbed my tools, and when I rounded the side of the house, she was already standing at the back gate, waiting for me. Amelia was younger than me by a good stretch, brunette, composed in a way that read as practiced rather than calm. She wore a plain white blouse and a dark skirt, and she held a thin document folder against her chest like it was part of her hand. She shook mine with a grip that surprised me, firm and quick, and she thanked me for coming on short notice. Her eyes were tired, the same tired I'd heard on the phone. I remember thinking she carried something heavy she wasn't going to name. I walked the fence line with her and gave her the news straight. The back fence was 50 feet of cedar that had gone soft at the posts, and a fair job meant pulling it all out and resetting 6 posts in concrete, not patching the pretty parts. She nodded and asked how fast I could do it. I told her 3 days if the weather held. She said, "Do it in 2 and I'll pay you for 3," and I almost smiled, because that was the first sign she was the kind of person who solved problems by throwing weight at them. I worked through the afternoon, and she stayed on the porch longer than any client I'd ever had, watching me set the first 2 posts. Around 4, she brought me a glass of water without me asking, and she stood near the gate while I drank it. We talked a little. I learned she'd taken over her grandfather's company when he passed, that she'd been running it alone for 3 years, that the house had been his, and she'd moved in after he died because she couldn't bring herself to sell it. 3 years alone in a house that size. I understood that more than I let on. I told her I'd lost my wife, and she said she was sorry in a way that didn't feel like a reflex. After that, we were easier with each other. There was a moment the second day I keep coming back to. I was fitting the 3rd post, and she was sitting on the porch step, and she asked me how long I'd been doing this kind of work. I told her since I was 17 that my father had been a carpenter too, and had taught me to read wood before I read much else. She said that must be a good thing to have, a thing your hands know how to do without asking. I looked up at her, and for a second the practiced composure slipped, and I saw a woman who ran a company of 300 people and didn't have a single person in her life who just showed up and made something steady. Then the composure came back, and she thanked me for the water glass and went inside. By the end of the 2nd day, the fence was done, straight and tight, and I was packing my truck when she asked me to sit on the porch a minute. She had a question, she said, and it wasn't about the fence. I sat down across from her. She set the folder on the table between us and didn't open it, and for a long moment she just looked out at the yard. Then she told me, plainly, that she needed to be married, legally, for 1 year. A clause in her grandfather's trust required it by her next birthday, or the company went to a cousin she didn't trust, and 300 jobs went with it. She didn't want love. She wanted a man who'd be believable for a year, and then walk away clean. And she'd watched me work for 2 days, and she'd decided that man was me. I should have said no. I should have said, I'm sorry, that's not my life, and driven back down the hill to my quiet porch. But she asked the way a person asks when they've run out of people to ask, and there was something in it that reminded me of the night Mary got sick. The way you reach for help only when there's nothing left to reach for. I didn't say yes for the money. I said yes because she'd been embarrassed to ask, and that small shame told me she was honest in a way I could trust. What I didn't know was why she was so afraid of that cousin, and she didn't tell me that part. Not yet. We met at the diner in town 2 days later, the way 2 practical people would, not the way a romance would. She'd brought a single typed page, folded in thirds, and I'd brought my reading glasses and nothing else. The waitress knew me and raised an eyebrow at the woman across the booth, and I could tell she was already building a story in her head. I let her. Amelia ordered a coffee she didn't drink and set the page down between the salt and the ketchup, and we got to it. The terms were plain, and she read them to me like she was reading a contract, because she was. 1 year of legal marriage, with separate bedrooms and shared meals optional but encouraged so the house looked lived in. 2 or 3 public appearances, a holiday party, maybe a dinner with her company's board. There would be no real intimacy, none expected and none wanted on either side. A monthly deposit into my account, an amount that made me sit back in the booth, and she pushed it across the table before I could object. At the end of the year, a quiet filing, and we'd go back to being 2 strangers who once shared a fence. I pushed the number back at her. I told her I didn't want to be bought, that I'd do it, but not for that. She shook her head and explained it the way she explained everything, clearly and without rushing. The money wasn't payment for me. It was the cost of making the contract look real to anyone who looked closely. A wife who paid a man nothing looked like a charity case, and a charity case looked like a fake. A monthly transfer looked like a husband keeping house while his wife ran the business, and nobody asked questions about that. I understood, and I took it, but I told her the money would sit in a separate account I wouldn't touch until the year was over. She looked at me a beat longer than she needed to. Then she nodded. Then she told me the part that explained the fear in her. Her birthday was in 11 months, and the clause said married, not engaged, not planning, not filing. Married, with a license on record. The cousin had already hired a lawyer out of the city, and the lawyer had already requested a copy of the trust. She didn't say the cousin's name, and I didn't ask, but her hand tightened around the coffee cup when she got to that part, and I understood that this wasn't a business problem for her. It was a family wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I asked her the question you'd ask. Why me, really? She put her cup down, and she was honest with me, the way you're honest when you're too tired to be anything else. She said she couldn't ask a man her own age without it turning into something, and she couldn't ask a friend without owing a favor she couldn't repay. She said I was a stranger who did good work and didn't look at her the way men usually did, that I'd looked at the fence and at her hands and at the porch, but never at her like she was something to be won. That was the first time in a long time a woman's words made me feel like more of a man rather than less. I sat with that for a while before I answered. We went to the courthouse that Friday. A small, plain ceremony, no family, 2 witnesses a paralegal's office provided for $50 and a thank you. I signed my name on the line next to hers, and I felt the strangeness of it, putting my life down on paper next to a woman whose name I was taking and whose life I didn't yet know. The clerk congratulated us without looking up. We walked back out into the afternoon sun, married, and she shook my hand on the courthouse steps like we'd closed a deal, which I suppose we had. I drove home to pack a bag, and the house felt different already, like it knew I was leaving it for a while. I stood in the kitchen a minute, with my hand on the counter Mary used to wipe down, and I told her, in my head, that I was going to be gone a while, but I was coming back. I don't know why I needed to say that. I said it anyway. I moved into the guest room with a single duffel and a box of tools, because I didn't know how to go anywhere without my tools. The room was clean and cold in that way a room gets when nobody's been sleeping in it, and I set my bag on the bed and stood there a minute listening to the sighs of the house. It was the kind of quiet that has too many rooms in it, the opposite of my house, which was small and full of Mary's things. This house was full of nice things that didn't look touched. I learned her rhythms the way a man learns a job site, by watching. She was up early, on the phone in a low voice by 6, working through breakfast, standing at the counter. She ate meals like they were errands, quick and standing, and she stayed at her desk in the upstairs office until the light went blue outside the window. The first 3 days we barely shared a room, and I told myself that was the arrangement working the way it was supposed to. Then the proximity problem started, the one nobody tells you about when you set rules on paper. 2 people in a big house trying not to be in the same room will fail at it, because houses have hallways and kitchens and 1 coffee maker. We met in the hall at 2 a.m, both of us up for water, and the first time it was awkward, and the second time it was less awkward. By the end of the first week, we'd stopped pretending we weren't sharing a kitchen. She started leaving coffee made in the morning before I came down, and when I thanked her, she said the pot had just happened to be on, which we both knew was a lie we were letting each other keep. The small things crept in the way small things do, without anyone deciding. I fixed the kitchen drawer that stuck, then the hinge on the pantry door, then the loose board on the back porch. She noticed each one the day after it was done, and never said thank you, only left something small in return, a better brand of coffee, a pair of work socks on my chair. One Thursday I cooked dinner because she'd forgotten to eat, and we sat across from each other at a table meant for 10, and ate chicken and rice, and didn't talk much. It was the first meal in a long time that didn't feel like one person eating alone. I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way she held her pen when she was tired, tight at the top. The way she read her emails out loud under her breath when she thought no one could hear. The particular sigh she let out at the end of a call that had gone badly, the one that meant she was already rearranging the next hour in her head. A man who pays that much attention to a woman he's not supposed to love is already in trouble, and I knew it, and I kept paying attention anyway, because there was no one else in the house to do it. The first public appearance came 3 weeks in, a company dinner at a hotel in the city. She coached me on the drive, who to be quiet around, who to let her handle, what to say if anyone asked how we met. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in years, but when we got there I found I could do it, stand a half step behind her, steady and plain, and let her do the talking. A man at the table, one of her board members, leaned over halfway through the salad and said we had the look of newlyweds, the easy kind. Amelia laughed and leaned her shoulder into mine and said we were, and I felt the weight of her there against me, and I didn't move away. I didn't want to. On the drive home she thanked me, quiet, looking at the road. The car was quiet too, but it wasn't the same quiet as my house. This quiet had someone in it, breathing in the seat beside me, and I noticed the difference the way you notice a room warming up. I told her she'd done well, and she almost smiled, and we drove the rest of the way with the heater on and nothing to say, which was already more than the deal had asked for. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the first crack in a wall I'd built good and thick. It rained for 4 days straight that October, the kind of steady rain that makes a big house feel smaller and a quiet arrangement feel closer. I worked on small indoor things, sanding a shelf, tightening a cabinet, while she worked the phone in the office with the door closed. I could hear her voice through the floor, low and even, the voice she used when something was going wrong and she refused to let it sound like it was. I'd learned to read that voice in 3 weeks, which was faster than I'd meant to. The call with the lawyers went badly. I could tell by the way the door stayed closed an hour after her voice stopped. I made a sandwich I didn't need and read in the living room and waited, the way a carpenter waits out bad weather, with nothing to do but be there. Around 1 a.m, I came down for water and found her on the kitchen floor, not crying, just sitting with her back against the cabinet and a mug in her hands that had gone cold. She looked up at me and didn't say anything. I didn't ask what was wrong, because I'd been that person on the floor, and I knew asking wouldn't help yet. I made tea, not coffee, and I sat down on the floor across from her, with my back against the opposite cabinet, and I held my own mug and waited. We sat like that for a long time, the rain on the window, the kitchen light off, just the stove hood giving us enough to see each other by. This is the kind of love I know how to give, being in the room and not needing it to be about me, and I gave it to her the way I'd have given it to anyone I cared about, without thinking. After a while, she started to talk. She told me about her grandfather, how he'd built the company from a single warehouse on the edge of town, how he'd kept the same desk for 40 years because he said a man who changed his desk forgot what he'd built. She told me she'd been the one to sit with him the last year while the rest of the family circled, the one who learned the numbers and the names and the customers, because she was the one who showed up. She told me about the weight of holding 300 jobs in her hands, of being the person who never got to be the one who needed someone. She said she was tired of being strong in a way that meant she could never lean. I listened the way I listened to wood before I cut it, with attention and without rushing, because the last thing she needed was a man fixing something she was still showing me. Then she said the sentence that turned it. She said she was glad it was me. Not a love confession, not even close, just a true sentence, and I heard exactly what it meant and what it didn't mean, and I held it carefully the way you hold a board that's almost the right length. I told her she could sit here as long as she wanted, and that I'd be down here either way. She stayed another hour, then went up to bed, and I stayed until I was sure she was asleep, washed both mugs, dried them, and put hers back on the hook where she kept it. That was the night it stopped being pretend for me, and I knew it the way you know a wall is gone before you turn around to look. And it frightened me. The last time I loved somebody, I had to watch her leave this world, and I'd spent 4 years making sure I never gave anyone that kind of power again. I went to bed in the guest room and lay there in the dark and didn't sleep for a long time, and I thought about Mary, and I thought about the mug on its hook, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. I only knew I couldn't keep calling this a deal and mean it. The weeks after that were a slow thing I didn't have a name for. The house got warmer without either of us deciding it should, the way a room warms when you forget to turn the heat down. She started leaving her office door open in the afternoons, and I started reading in the living room instead of shut in the guest room, and the distance between us got shorter by inches we didn't measure. I told myself it was comfort, that two people sharing a house naturally settle into a rhythm. I told myself that because the other word for it was harder to say. More small acts stacked up, each one too small to mean anything on its own. I built her a bookshelf for the office because her stacks of papers were sliding off the desk, and I matched the stain to her grandfather's desk as close as I could get it. She came in that evening and stood in the doorway and looked at it without speaking, and I knew it had landed. A few days later, a better pair of work gloves appeared on my chair, no note, and I put them on and they fit, which meant she'd looked at my hands close enough to know the size. One Sunday, I taught her to sand a piece of walnut in the garage, and she was bad at it and laughed, and the laugh was a sound I hadn't heard from her before, loose and young, the kind that comes out of a person when they've forgotten to guard it. There was an evening on the porch in November, the air turned and sharp, the maples bare across the yard. She came out with a blanket around her shoulders and sat in the other chair, the one Mary used to use, and I felt a small hitch at that and let it pass. We watched the dark come up over the field. After a while, she leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she had at the dinner, only now there was no audience, and no board member, and no reason for it, except that she wanted to. I almost said something. I had a sentence all the way to my teeth, and I held it there, and I let it go back down, because the year wasn't over, and the rules still stood, and I wasn't going to be the man who broke a deal for his own want. The cousin made his move that same month. A letter arrived from the lawyer, formal and long, requesting proof the marriage was real. Financial records, photographs, a home visit at a date of their choosing. Amelia read it at the kitchen table, and her face went still. The stillness I'd learned meant she was holding everything in place by force. She said they'd expected it, and that they could handle it, but her hand on the letter wasn't steady, and I reached over and put mine on top of hers without thinking, and she let it stay there. She didn't pull away. That was the night I knew I wasn't protecting a deal anymore, even if I hadn't said it out loud to myself. I did the thing I knew how to do. Without being asked, I started leaving signs of a shared life around the house, so that anyone walking in would believe it. A second coat by the front door, mine next to hers. 2 mugs in the drying rack instead of 1. My tools in the garage where a husband's tools would go, on a pegboard I hung one Saturday. A photo of the 2 of us, from the company dinner, framed on the hall table. I told myself I was doing it to protect the deal, to keep the contract safe until the year was up. The truth I wouldn't say yet was that I was also doing it because I wanted every one of those signs to be real, and laying them down was the closest I could come to saying so. The home visit came the first week of December, and on the surface it went the way we'd planned. The lawyer was a thin man in a gray coat who walked through the room slowly, looking at the coats by the door, the mugs, the photo on the hall table, the pegboard in the garage. Amelia and I played our parts, easy and unhurried, and I let him watch us the way a tradesman lets another tradesman watch his work, confident it would hold up. He left unsatisfied, but unable to prove anything, and when the door closed behind him, she let out a breath she'd been holding for a week. I thought we'd cleared it. But the visit cracked something in her, and I saw it happen before she did. After the lawyer left, she stood in the hallway and looked at the house, at my coat and my tools, and my photo on her table, and I watched her face change the way weather changes, a cloud coming over it that wasn't about the cousin anymore. She'd spent her whole life keeping control of every room she was in, and this was the one room she couldn't keep control of, because I was in it, and I'd gotten past the part of her that managed things. She didn't say any of that. She just went quiet in a different way than before. She pulled back, slowly and kindly, which was worse than if she'd been cold. The coffee stopped appearing in the morning. The office door closed again. She worked late and came home after I was asleep, and in the mornings there was a note on the counter about dinner in the fridge, considerate and careful, and full of distance. She was kind about it because kindness was how she protected me, and I understood that, even as I felt the warmth go out of the rooms one by one. The house got big and cold again, the way it had been the day I moved in. I started to feel like a guest who had stayed too long. I read it correctly and wrong at the same time, which is the most dangerous way to read a person. I thought she'd remembered the rules and was enforcing them, that the turn I'd felt on the kitchen floor that rainy night had been mine alone. I told myself the deal was the deal, and that the kindest thing I could do was finish the year quietly, take nothing, and leave so she could have her life back without the weight of me in it. I told myself that was honor. Looking back, I think it was fear wearing honor's coat, because staying meant risking that she didn't feel what I felt, and I'd already lived through one goodbye I couldn't survive twice. So I started to pack, a little at a time, a few things each day so she wouldn't notice. I folded the shirts she'd never seen me wear and put them in the duffel in the back of the closet. I took my book down from the living room shelf and brought it up to the guest room. I eased out of the rooms I'd eased into, the same way, in reverse, and I didn't tell her, because telling her would have meant hearing her answer, and I wasn't sure I could carry it either way. Each thing I put in the bag felt like giving back a piece of something I'd been borrowing. The dark moment came on a Wednesday night. She came up to ask me something, I don't remember what, and she opened the guest room closet for a blanket and saw the half-packed bag behind my shirts. She didn't say a word. She stood in the doorway with the closet open, and I saw her face do something I'd never seen it do, the careful stillness breaking for a second into something raw before she put it back. She closed the closet, and she closed the door, and she walked away down the hall, and I sat on the edge of the bed and knew I'd broken something I couldn't name by trying not to break anything at all. The final week of the year was the longest short week of my life. The company was safe, the deadline had passed, the cousin's challenge had failed in the lawyer's office for lack of proof. The contract had done its job. There was no reason left for me to stay, and every reason on paper to go, and I'd already half-packed, so I told myself the decision had been made for me. I planned to leave on the morning of the last day, quietly, the way I'd come, one bag out the door before she was up. I had the separate account, the monthly deposits, untouched, and I meant to hand it back to her on the way out, every dollar, because I'd never been in this for the money, and I wasn't going to leave with it. I wrote a note, short and plain, thanking her for the year and telling her the fence would hold for another 10 if she kept the posts sealed. I set it on the kitchen counter where she'd find it, and I went to bed that night, meaning to be gone by 6, and I lay awake most of the night listening to the house the way I had the first night I'd moved in. Somewhere down the hall, I realized, she was awake too. I could feel it the way you feel someone on the other side of a wall. She found me on the porch at 5 a.m, before the light, in the cold. I was sitting with my coat on and my bag inside the door, and I'd come out to say goodbye to the chairs. She came out in her sweater and sat down in the other one, and she didn't say anything for a while. Then she said she'd found the bag, and that she'd found the note, and that she'd sat up the rest of the night deciding whether to let me go. Then she did something she'd never done in the year we'd shared. She spoke first, and plainly, without managing a single word of it. She told me she hadn't pulled back because the rules mattered. She told me she'd pulled back because the rules were the only thing between her and how scared she was of how much she wanted me to stay. She said she'd spent her whole life being the one who holds it together, and that I was the first person who'd ever sat on the floor with her and asked for nothing, and it had undone her in a way she didn't know how to live with. She said she didn't want a husband for a year. She wanted me, and she had wanted me, she said, since the morning I washed her mug and put it back on the hook where she keeps it. I sat there with her saying that, and the cold porch and the bare maples and the fence I'd built all went still around us. I was careful one more time, the way I'd been careful all year, because I'd earned the right to be careful, and I wasn't going to throw it away now. I told her about Mary, about the fear of loving someone you can lose, about how the quiet house had almost won, about the night on the kitchen floor when it stopped being pretend. I told her I'd stopped pretending a long time ago, and had been pretending that I was still pretending, which was the truest sentence I'd said in a year. She listened the way I'd listened to her, without rushing me, and I understood then that she'd already learned the same lesson I had, that love is mostly showing up and staying in the room. I didn't answer her with a grand gesture, because neither of us was built for grand gestures. I answered her by taking her hand and not letting go, and by telling her I'd stay, not for the company, not for the contract, not for the fence, but because this porch felt like home when she was on it. She held my hand back, and the first light came up over the field across the road, the same way it came up at my old house, and for the first time in 4 years I watched it come up and felt like I had somewhere to be. The year ended there on the chairs in the cold, not with a signing or a filing, but with 2 people choosing, freely, to keep going. The contract was over. The marriage was not. Some mornings now, the fence I built is still standing, straight and tight, 2 mugs in the rack, her coat next to mine. A love that grows quietly can be the loudest thing in a life. If my story warmed your heart, leave a comment and tell me which moment got you the most, and stay close to home with me for the next one.